Welcome back. Ferguson, Missouri, of course, not the only flashpoint in the nation when it comes to racial tension and the actions of police. Our region's been focused on the police-related death of Eric Garner, who was killed by a chokehold from a police officer in Staten Island on July 17th. There have been protests and demands for a change in police tactics and actions since, and a major rally is planned for this Saturday in Staten Island. Garner's death came as broken windows comes into greater focus, the focus on smaller crimes that police say then deter people from committing more serious crimes. But the results have shown a racial imbalance, more stops and arrests of people of color at a rate that's out of whack with population numbers, like we saw with stop and frisk before it and a host of other police approaches. But supporters of those policies say without them, regardless of who's being arrested, you would see an uptick in crime, shootings, and murders. And this weekend in a post-stop and frisk environment, we did see gunfire and violence ringing out across the Big Apple. More now from FiOS 1's Samantha Liebman.
A violent weekend in New York City. Between midnight Friday and midnight Sunday, there were 13 separate incidents, injuring 21 people, killing 2. The suspect in the double homicide caught on surveillance, brazenly shooting on a Hamilton Heights street corner. Distraught friends and family of 21-year-old Kenny Jimenez and 26-year-old Francisco Mercedes continued to surround a growing makeshift memorial where they were gunned down. Meanwhile, Mayor Bill de Blasio says despite the uptick, overall crime in the city is down.
We're doing that consistently by applying officers into the areas of greatest need, into the precincts with the greatest challenges, into some of the NYCHA developments with greatest challenges. And by and large, that effort has been bearing fruit. But whenever we see any uptick in shooting, we apply additional resources quickly.
And crime is down despite a decrease in the use of stop and frisk. According to the NYPD, there were 130,000 less stops through June of this year compared with the same time last year. But Council member Jumaane Williams, who sponsored legislation passed last year to make police more accountable for racial profiling, says there is no scientific correlation between fewer stops and more shootings.
But everybody wants to rush to violate the Constitution and over police communities where it hasn't really done the job that we want it to do.
And while shootings are up just over 10% from the same time last year, murders are down 12%, on path for a record low. But Williams thinks police aren't the only solution. He's hopeful that the expansion of a program from 5 to 14 precincts, a gun violence crisis management system announced by the mayor and council speaker last week, will help.
Put the people in the street to work on the people who are most likely to do these shootings and the biggest hot spots in the area, but we put wraparound services on that.
Those wraparound services include legal, mental health, as well as job training and placement. Williams believes the effects will be felt by next summer. Unfortunately, too late for the 2 men gunned down here. In Hamilton Heights, I'm Samantha Liebman reporting for RFL.
Gentlemen, I think we all know that despite what the numbers say, and the numbers indicate that the number of murders are down and the crime is down in New York City, that incidents like the number of shootings we saw this weekend are going to lead critics of the mayor of New York, critics of just critics in general, to say that, well, we're descending into a chaotic situation because we've eased back on policing. I'm curious your reaction.
Well, the police play lots of games, okay? One of the games is that if you can determine if crime is up or down based on whether you decide to make an arrest. So if you want to arrest every person that has an open container or has a marijuana cigarette, you can do that and say, wow, crime is up. Or you can ignore fights when people go in and with a black eye and say, I've been assaulted, and you say, no, you haven't been. So you have a lot of discretion there. And you see it right now in Ferguson, where after the police were criticized, they decided to stop intervening when people were looting. Well, there's no reason for you to stop intervening when people are looting. Nobody would ask that for that to happen. And the police, they had tanks, right? They were in their full military garb. Why couldn't they stop somebody from going in and stealing a TV? So what they're basically doing is saying, well, unless you do what we want you to do, we're not going to police at all. And that's not what you need. You need people who are professional, people whose skin is not so thin that they take personal offense. The police are supposed to be the ones with the thick skin. And the brass, the leadership in particular, swears an oath to defend and to protect the people in the community, and when necessary to arrest them and to use no more force than necessary. That's what they're supposed to do. What happens is that when the union is not getting its contract, you don't see any arrests. You see it in every city. You can go to Westchester County right now, go to White Plains, very few arrests. And when times are good and overtime is being paid, then you see tons of arrests.
You know, I'm struck by the coincidence, the similarities in some ways between the Garner case and what we've seen in Ferguson. Exactly. It's in some way, the Garner case with the chokehold, there's something even more visceral about it just because it was so up close and personal. And yet the reactions in New York City and the way the community has responded, vastly different than Ferguson. I'm curious why you think the reaction has been different and how close New York might be to a Ferguson-type situation.
New York has had more experience with this. We've been dealing with this kind of foolishness for the last 25 years, 30 years, more than that. And we have some good leadership in New York that pursues it. In other words, we don't just show up for the event or the march. We pursue it. We stay with it to the court. We don't let the system cover it up. So New York has had experience with this on both sides. The police have had experience. The community leadership has had experience. And so what we're seeing in Ferguson is a community that has not had this kind of situation on the police side or on the community side. And they don't really have they haven't developed any skills for addressing this. That's the difference, I think, in New York.
You know, Pastor, I'll come back to you in 1 second, but the critics owe Mayor de Blasio an apology. The video you just showed, oh, they went wild. How dare you put Sharpton in the blue room next to the mayor and give him an open mic? And, you know, Sharpton is the police commissioner, Sharpton is the mayor, who's in charge? I contend we haven't had violence here in New York because of Sharpton. The community trusts Sharpton and will take a wait-and-see approach. Plus, de Blasio, do you still feel critics that de Blasio did the wrong thing? Or did the mayor step up by letting everything be so transparent that's keeping tensions down? The Times even pointed out today in an editorial that de Blasio now deserves credit for how he handled Eric Garner. And that's why you haven't had, and hopefully you won't have, any violence here in New York.
What I would like to say, and this is not to take anything away from the National Action Network or Reverend Sharpton, but in New York City, as Dr. Franklin says, you have an army of clergy, New York Council of Churches, A.R. Bernard, Queens Fellowship of Churches, I'm on the board there, that are daily, constantly interfacing with City Hall and police commissioners and commanders of local precincts and the outreach process. So that infrastructure is there. And National Action Network is tapping into that because when they come into the communities, they engage with the clergy to help them to get these things together. So, I mean, we have that there. But I want to say one thing in reference to the clip of the shootings that we saw this weekend. I believe last weekend, week before last, in Nassau and Suffolk County, you had a man kill a lady in her house, and then you had like 2-3 murders, and a lot smaller population. We didn't see this same kind of reporting skewed from, oh, we must do something because it's a pandemic of crime, coming from Suffolk or Nassau County. I'm once again, we have to be very mindful how we portray this stuff.
And you can look even in White Plains, there were 3 shootings in June. White Plains is a population of 50,000. And you look at Manhattan, Manhattan's a mecca. You're drawing probably 12 million people on a given evening. So for you to have 13 shootings out of 12 million people, I mean, you look at it percentage-wise, the 3 shootings in White Plains is much greater.
I got to jump to a break. Up next, we're going to continue our discussion on the situation in Ferguson and New York and the state of Black America when we come back.